Hey, we're back for another one. On this episode of Get Real with Casey Kasem, I had an awesome conversation with Brian Drake. You might know Brian from his work as a fantasy writer with Fighting Chance Fantasy, as one of the hosts of Fantasy Football Hustle, and as host of Pro Football Focus on Sirius XM Fantasy. He was also a finalist for the FSWA Fantasy Football Article of the Year. In our sit down, we talked about Brian's start in the industry, being a part of the Kings Classic Draft, writing about what he enjoys, having a voice for podcasting, doing basketball play-by-play, and a ton more. Make sure to follow Brian on Twitter at Drake Fantasy. Follow me on Twitter at TheCaseyKasem, as well as the pod at GetReal_pod. This podcast is a proud member of the DAP Network. Thanks for listening, and here's my chat with Brian Drake. Dope. Okay, I think we are getting ready to go here. We have Brian Drake. Brian Drake, you, my friend, are somebody that I have known for a good portion of time in the fantasy football space. And even though I have known you for some time, there's a lot of things about you that I don't know. And I'm sure that people that are listening to this right now are probably wondering exactly who you are. And if they don't know who you are, this is a great introduction to who Brian Drake is. So before we start talking about your work in the fantasy football space, I want to go back to when you were growing up. Were you involved in sports? Was sports important to you, or did you have any sort of relationship with sports?
Well, yeah. First off, thanks for having me on. I know you
problem.
do all the biggest and best names in the fantasy community. So I'm sorry that this is your last show because I'm the last guy left in fantasy football. So it's been a great run, Casey. I love the shows. I've listened to many of them, but no, thanks for having me on. But yeah, in terms of sports, I was a huge sports guy growing up. And it's weird because my parents never pushed me into sports. My parents don't know anything about sports. My dad couldn't tell you, one NFL player right now, maybe outside of Tom Brady. But I loved it. That's how I grew up learning really about the country, was reading the sports page. I loved print journalism. I loved radio. I loved listening to games on the radio. So that's kind of how I figured out like where states were, is because I knew college football conferences and I would read in the paper and they would say, oh, okay, I get the Pac. Back then, it wasn't even the Pac-12. I mean, the Pac-8 and the Pac-10. I'm like, okay, here's these California schools, and then the Southeastern Conference, here's these schools down here. So I was just a big football fan. I grew up, I played a lot of baseball. I ran track from 6th grade all the way through college. I played golf in college, also at SUNY Oswego. So Al Roker, Linda Cohn, Monday Night Football's own Steve Levy, and me. There you go. That's the Oswego crew right there. So kids, if you want to save some money, don't go to Syracuse. Go 40 minutes up the road. Save yourself $100,000 and go to Oswego.
There you go. That's a baller lineup. I mean, you could join the ranks right there. So good advice. So you brought up track, and that kind of gets my ears perked up because I ran track. What did you run when you were in track?
I'm a guy, like, I can still run. I can fly. Like when I was a kid, man, I could just blaze. And I was like, okay, I'm going to sign up and I'm going to do cross country. I thought it was cross country skiing when I was in 6th grade. I live in Syracuse, New York.
Awesome.
It snows here half the year, right? So I'm like, oh, cool, cross country skiing. I show up the first day, they're like, no, kid, this is running. I'm like, okay, well, I'm here. I'm going to run. So then I really fell in love with cross country. And I think anybody that ever runs cross country, you can talk to them. They love it because there's just some camaraderie of going through the woods with your buddies and these long runs that you get to just shoot the breeze with your pals. And then when it came to track, I didn't like it as much because once I got through high school and into college, I was a really late bloomer. I graduated high school. I was 5'5". So I was going against like grown men. On my high school track team, my senior year, was a kid named Marquise Walker. And maybe some of you football fans may know him. He's the all-time leading receiver at the University of Michigan. So this guy is a super stud. And we sent like 6 kids D1 my senior year, and they all ran track with us for football. So it's little, Brian at 5'5", and then this land of giants, these men. So I didn't have the greatest career from that. And then I just kind of lost interest, and I was doing my high school newspaper. And I'm like, you know what? Like, cross country's over. I'll just go play baseball and golf and all that stuff.
So with the newspaper and everything, you were big into writing when you were growing up and into high school, college?
Yeah, I loved it. I really loved to write. And I have a passion for journalism. I have a passion for good journalism and real journalism. And that I get so upset now when I see like the Fox Newses of the world and just how people always blame the media out there. And really what's happened in the world is, not to go off on a soapbox, but the local news organizations aren't owned locally anymore. They're owned by these big conglomerations. And like my home newspaper here in Syracuse, it's owned by a company out of New Jersey. Like they're not even here in Syracuse. They just, people email in stories and then it kind of gets put together and sent out. But I loved writing, and my best friend at the time, he passed away in a DUI crash, and that's a whole nother story. My buddy Bill Leaf, he was a broadcaster here locally in Syracuse, and we went to Henniger High School. We had the nightly news, and we went insane, Casey, with this newspaper. The publication, everybody was reading this thing because we went so off the wall with it, where at one point I was drawing cartoons for the newspaper. I worked at a grocery store called Peter's. I think it was Peter's Grocery Store. And I did this cartoon called Frank the Freshman. And in it, I think I called the customers of Peter's white trash. Again, I'm like a 16-year-old just loser at this point. And I show up to work on a Friday. The guy who owns the store, Joe Peters, calls me and my buddy Bill into his office. He's got a copy of the nightly news in his hand. He puts it on the desk and he points to the cartoon and he goes, "What do you guys have to say about this?" My buddy Bill, super quick wit, looks at the guy and goes, "If you're reading it, we got great circulation." Guy goes, "You're both suspended for a week." We're like, "With pay?" He's like, "Yeah, it's a union job." We're like, "Great, see you, dude." But yeah, I love journalism. I love good writing. I love, The Athletic and people that put time into articles. I respect anybody who goes out there and really tries to hone their craft and write an article. Even the fantasy industry now is everyone, I just did an article about content creators versus engagement farmers. And really, however you get there, you get there. I just wanted to kind of poke fun at everybody. But if you go out and you could sit down and write an article, God bless you, because it's difficult, man. It's, how it is. It's difficult to create content. So, anybody in this industry or in any walk of entertainment or whatever you're writing about, if you've got a passion for it, just sit down and write and, read things. America doesn't read enough. So I'll get off my soapbox, but yes, we don't read enough in this country. People just want the 2-second headline and they think they know the story because they read the headline.
Well, that's how I kind of feel about it too. Sadly, it feels like a lot of places are moving away from the written word and they're moving more into this audio and visual format where we're putting out content that way.
Sure.
But it's so nice to sit down and actually read an article. Do you think that like having deadlines and the fact that things aren't evergreen might contribute to the fact that like articles sometimes get put out that aren't that are only subpar?
And over it, you and I got started at fightingchancefantasy.com. So shout out to Ryan Hallam, Steve Rappin, the guys over there. Great guys. I'm still there helping young fantasy writers try to reach their goals and go on and get paid like you. You're a great success story from Fighting Chance. So I love to tell these kids, I call them kids because I'm in my mid 40s now.
No, I totally am.
I call anybody who works as a kid now. They'll who knows, they could be 16 or 46. You're a kid. But yeah, I like to tell them, go out and you can write about anything you want here. I don't care if you can write about women's WNBA, you can write about horse racing, you can write about NFL, NBA. I don't give a shit what you write about. Just write about it. Have fun, be passionate, get some eyes on it, because how else is somebody going to see you like yourself? You work for the fantasy footballers and, we've got a lot of great guys. Kevin Tompkins was there for a while. My partner on The Hustle, Dwayne McFarland, was there for a while. Put out content. Just practice your craft. You're going to get so much better. And, we've got some guys over there now, like Britt Flynn, young girl working there, kind of was real nervous, didn't write anything before she came to us. She's doing excellent articles. Guy Leo Grandio, he just did an article on DFS. I gave him the numbers this week. I go, Leo, this is the most viewed article of the month on Fighting Chance. Like, stick with this dynasty stuff. Like, you found a calling here. You found a niche. Like, rock and roll with that. And once you find stuff you like to write about, then it gets real easy. But when you start forcing it, then then it becomes harder. And then I think your readers sense that too, if you don't have a passion for it.
Totally. And you were talking about all the quote unquote young blood, the up and coming people with Fighting Chance Fantasy that you have over there, how awesome does it feel to be able to help in their path, in their career path, and be there for those people?
It's great. It's not the listen. We know what Fighting Chance is. We know it's not ESPN. It's not Fantasy Pros. It's not PFF. It's a great place for you to get your start. And now, we're trying to expand where if people want to do podcasts, we had Drew Davenport, who people might know from Football Guys, is their auction expert. We had him come on. He started a podcast. I got another friend from another big site who might come over and do some work with us. So I don't care what you want to do. Like, we'll get you on, we'll get you working. Ryan Hallam just hit me up today. He goes, "Hey, I got a kid from Syracuse University who wants to do some content. Here's his email address. Let's go." And it's all sink or swim because I'm not going to hold your feet to the fire. I'm not your parents. I don't pay you to do this. I tell everybody that day one with Fighting Chance, I'm never going to pay you. I don't get paid for this. All right. Like, we do it because we enjoy it and we like seeing people grow. So this is your playground. If you want to write every single day, great, go nuts with it. If you want to write once a month, if you want to do DFS and you realize, DFS sucks, I don't want to do that, I'm going to write about props. Good, just do it. And there's some folks that they come in like a ball of fire, then you never hear from them again. And you're like, wait, is this guy still associated with the site? He's still got the name and the Twitter bio, but and there's some folks who are way into it and they contribute every single week. So if anybody's listening to this right now and you want to contribute, hit me up at Drake Fantasy, at FC Fantasy Sports. That's the Fighting Chance Twitter handle. We're always looking for people to come in and grow. And, your passion is whatever you want. You want to write about it, we'll put it on the website.
Yes, that's like the best part of Fighting Chance Fantasy, like starting out there and being able to just write what I want to write and say, hey, I want to write about old guys, or I want to do this, or I want to do that, and being able to test the water and kind of see what works and what doesn't work. So like, it's an awesome like stepping stone to future endeavors as well, and add to your repertoire and everything. So excellent. But let's go back in time and talk about when you first started playing fantasy football. How did you actually find out about it, and how was that first experience?
I started a league that I still run today. I reference it on my Sirius show. I reference it on the Fantasy Football Hustle, and I'm the commissioner of the Alcoholic Haze. It's a league of my buddies from Syracuse, my fraternity brothers from Oswego. We still have pretty much, I think it's like 10 of the original 12 guys are still in this league. And I think how did we find out about it? Boy, I don't know. Maybe it's just you see an ad on ESPN.com or something, or Yahoo, and that's the site we use. And we just said, let's give this a try. It started out, I believe, as an 8-man league. We're like, and I was awful. And if you talk to the guys in the league, I still am. But, I was terrible. But it was just so much fun, creating these kind of rivalries with your friends and the smack talk and the draft. And trust me, we've got rules upon rules, but we also started doing really fun things. Like, let's do a thing called Dudes Night Out. And it'll be around the trade deadline, and we'll all go out to dinner and we'll get guys drunk and try to steal their best players and all that. And it's done really well. People have now taken this league and run with it where, the trophy, which sits over here to my left, when I got married, the guy who was the champion at the time, he brought the trophy to the wedding. Wow. We named the trophy after a guy in the wedding's insanely drunk girlfriend, which I don't even know if he knows that, but it is. We had it was very unfortunate this year. One of our members' brother passed away, and the league got together and we sent a flower arrangement as the group, so when we showed up, his parents, who didn't know us from a hole in the wall, were like, "Oh, we're the fantasy football guys." And, they're that clicked like, "Oh, thank you very much." And, it's cool because as you grow and, there's so many guys playing fantasy and writing fantasy who are in their 20s. When you get in your 40s, 50s, 60s, these bonds remain. So that's what it becomes. It's that way to check in with your friends. And through the pandemic, we found that out. It's like, hey, hey, let me text this guy. Hey, how you doing? Oh, you're good. Okay. Hey, boy, you want to trade me Joe Mixon? No. All right. Hey, how's the kids? Bah, bah, bah. That's the beauty of fantasy leagues. Like, yeah, someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, but at the end of the day, it's just keeping you and your pals connected.
And so that league's been around for a while. Are you in any other leagues from around that time still as well, or is that the only league from around that time?
No, I mean, geez, that league started. Wow, that's 15 plus years ago. I'm trying to count the names on the side of the trophy. Mine's only on there once, unfortunately. But yeah, that's the only one I've been in for that long. I got a couple of dynasty leagues that I'm in that I need to make some moves on because folks are getting a little long in the tooth. But
Yeah, feel you on that.
yeah, but we'll see how long CMC and DeAndre Hopkins can hang on.
Do you remember any of the first players that you drafted in that first draft that you had?
I don't. You know what I do remember, because I looked it up yesterday preparing for the show, was how I got into Fighting Chance was, and you were already there. It was a mock draft they were doing, and somebody dropped out, and I needed to, or Ryan Hallam, who is running Fighting Chance, he is, the godfather. I call him a Fighting Chance. He's at Fighting Chance on fantasy. Make sure you give him a follow. And he just put out a call. He's like, hey, I need somebody to do this mock draft. So I hit him with a DM, just total happenstance. I was looking at my phone at that second when he sent the tweet, and I'm like, yo, dude, I'll jump in and do this. And maybe he tells me after the fact, he's like, oh, I thought you were in the industry. I'm like, no, I'm just some jerk off. I'm like, I'll do it. So I went on, I did the thing. I did a little write up for him. And I looked at, and in that draft, I want to say that was 2017. And I think I took Zach Ertz in the third round. I looked at his draft. I'm like, oh my God, this draft is terrible. Like, why would anybody listen to the advice from this guy? But it was not a good draft at all. But you'll learn a lot from that, looking back on your old mistakes.
Well, I'm sure that nobody's draft was. I'm positive that mine was probably like the worst of the worst. But that's neither here nor there. We're not talking about me. We're talking about you. and
luckily,
honestly,
we didn't play that league out.
You're right, because that would have been very sad. So that you kind of just like fell into this awesome opportunity, and that's pretty cool. So you were able to write with Fighting Chance Fantasy. When you were in college, were you doing that kind of stuff too, writing and going to school for that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I went to SUNY Oswego. And initially, if people listen to my shows, they think I went to Syracuse because I talk so much about it. It's because I live here, and I've the Syracuse banner over my shoulder here, and I was accepted to go to Syracuse. I went. There's this program. If you graduate from a city high school, which I did, props to Henniger High School, and you have over an 85 average, you get over 1,000 on your SATs. I don't know, maybe there's some other contingent plan, but you get admission to Syracuse. And I'm like, great, I'm going to go to the Newhouse School. It's the most famous schools where all the broadcasters went. Me and my buddy Bill, boom, it's going to be great. He went and, has $150,000 in debt. I show up, I'm with my father, who's a truck mechanic, and my mom's a stay-at-home mom at the time. We have lunch on the floor of the Carrier Dome. We go to the admissions office and financial aid. They go, Mr. Drake, this is what it's going to cost for your son to go to Syracuse for 4 years. My dad looks at that. He looks over at me. He goes, don't sign that. And he's like, I'm not paying for that. And he's like, you'll never pay that off. And I mean, you see now how many people are burdened with student loan debt.
God. Me.
And when my buddy Bill went, and when he passed, I kind of collected a lot of his things, and I saw the bills from Syracuse coming in. He owed $125,000 to Syracuse University. And this was 20 years ago. So God only knows now it's like 70 grand a year to go there. So I said, okay, I'm going to go to sight unseen to SUNY Oswego, which is 40 minutes up the road. It's right on the banks of Lake Ontario. It's this little port town. They're known for great Division III college hockey, beautiful facility they have now. They put a lot of money into it. Makes my degree look a lot better. So I went there. I go, I'm going to go for a year or two, get my, P's and Q's all taken care of. Then I'm going to transfer to Syracuse. Well, all of a sudden now you're joining a fraternity, you're meeting girls, you got a bunch of friends. I became the sports director of WNYO, which was the radio station on campus. I was the play-by-play voice of the basketball team, which I loved. Boy, I wish I could do basketball play-by-play again. That was so much fun. And I was doing sports commentary for WTOP, which is the student television station. The one thing I didn't do, Casey, which is moronic, is what I came there with. I didn't write for the Oswegonian, which was the student newspaper there. Like, I think back, like, if I would have just stopped drinking for 30 seconds and chasing girls, like, I could have actually written. I don't remember one class I went to at Oswego. Not one. I don't know how I got out of that place. But, you know, I left there, and, you know, here we are today. I'm sort of using my degree, I tell my father 20 years later. But yeah, it was a good time going up to SUNY Oswego.
See, student loans, I had that conversation with my dad over the weekend. He's like, "You're still paying off your student loans?" I'm like,
Oof.
"Bro." And he's like, "What? I had mine paid off." I was like, "Dude, let's not even start. I'm not going to go
Oh,
there."
yeah. Mine were paid off like 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's okay. One day. So play by play. Oh, can you hear me? All right.
Yeah.
Play by play. How did you get involved with that, and how did you learn how to do that?
I loved listening to sports on the radio as a kid. And here in Syracuse, and this is, I'll tie this into somebody you had on your show before, Matthew Berry. Everyone knows Matthew Berry from ESPN. He went to Syracuse University. His fantasy league, I don't know if it was baseball or football. It's in his book that I've read, and is called I think it's like the Doug Logan Fantasy Football League. Doug Logan is actually, he was the radio play-by-play announcer for the station here in Syracuse covering Syracuse athletics. So I listened to Doug Logan also. And I love just listening to those guys call games and the excitement and the passion that they had. And I always wanted to do it. And going to school, and then, you know, there weren't a lot of guys that wanted to talk basketball. People who go to Oswego love hockey. There's no football at Oswego. So you have to either do basketball or hockey. And when I became the sports director of the radio station, I go, the hell with this. Let's get people. You want to call lacrosse? We're doing lacrosse games now. You want to do baseball? We're doing baseball games now. And looking at what they do now, I still follow them on Twitter. They do all that stuff. And I'm happy to say that it started with, you know, my era when I was there, just saying, hey, can we run a phone line out? And Casey, if you saw the equipment that we had, oh my God, I used to carry around in my car, my 1998 Pontiac Sunfire, right? I thought this thing was so badass. It was the lamest car of all time. But we had a box that we stole from the post office. It was like this corrugated cardboard box. And in it was this little like Comrex. And we would go to Radio Shack. Some of you kids listening don't even know what a Radio Shack is. And we would buy a wireless microphone so that I could then talk to the sideline reporter across the gym. And half the time it didn't even work. And then we had 200 feet of a telephone line that we'd have to run from the board to God knows where in the gymnasium. Yeah, so I don't know where the story was going, but that's what we were doing up at WNYO. And man, those were good times.
It sounds like, a lot of hands-on experience and everything. So that experience, I'm sure, helped out with what you're doing now in the fantasy space. When you first started out in the fantasy space, we heard the story about how Ryan had you come on, and very excited that you got to join that site, got to be, on the staff with me and everything. That was so dope. When you first started putting out content, what was going through your mind, and how were you feeling at that time?
I think a lot of people in the space, and I see it. I know guys like Joe Dolan have tweeted about it, and some other folks, and it's like you wonder why you're here, and you're like, I don't measure up to this guy, and this guy does it so well, and like, why would anybody want to listen to my stuff? And I still kind of feel that way, because I'll have all these great ideas for articles, and I'm like, you know what, like, Adam Levitan's doing that solo pod. It's awesome. Like, just listen to him. He does a better job than I'll do. Or, this guy's just go read Hayden Winks. He's doing a kick-ass job. Or, Dwayne McFarland or whoever else you want to listen to out there. And there's so many great writers. And hey, I'm going to get into Dynasty League. Well, you can listen to Eric Dickens and the guys at DLF. Like, why would I get into it? So I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I want to get into podcasting. I want to start doing that. And I kind of shifted my focus, and Ryan and the guys that were really cool with it, they were like, okay, like, if you want to do a podcast, we'll set up a podcast for you. And that's really how the Fantasy Football Hustle was born, was just out of me going to those guys like, hey, listen, like, you guys don't have a lot of podcasts. He's like, can I do one? Like, I'll buy a laptop and I'll get the guests and whatever we have to do. So yeah, that was the genesis of the Fantasy Football Hustle, because I realized that I wasn't going to write, and I still feel this way. I'm like, I haven't found the niche of what I want to write about yet. I like doing kind of just interesting articles and columns versus like, here's a start sit for the week, and here's your injury advice, and here's this. Like, maybe I could kind of get into some props. I kind of dig that, but I don't know. I don't feel like I'll ever be like the waiver wire guy or yeah. And I know you've done articles like that, and it becomes a fucking grind, man.
It becomes one of those things. Yeah. You start resenting it and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. And that's when you're just like, oh, okay, I got to find something else. This isn't working for me anymore. So I get you.
Yeah. And that's what I was trying to say in my article about the content creators and the engagement farmers. And I know there's some people that, they took it the wrong way. They thought I was taking shots at them. And, if any of those people are listening, like, I had nobody in mind when I wrote that. It's just, I tried to poke fun at both sides of it. And, really it's just find your niche. Do what you are passionate about and what you're good at, and it will shine through. Like, I use my pal Dwayne as an example. Like, Dwayne's not trying to do comedy. He's not trying to do, random shtick. He's like, I'm going to be the utilization guy. And he just went full steam ahead on that. And maybe, you're the injury guy, or, like Jake Throwbridge, he does incredible videos with songs and all that. Like, that's kick ass. I'm glad he's doing that. And he's not like, oh, and by the way, here's my waiver wire article. Like, no, nobody wants that. Be the funny joke guy, make cool videos. So I'm glad people find their niche out there. And I think it just takes time. You just got to find what you enjoy doing. And once you do it, like you found this, you enjoy doing these kind of one-on-one interviews with people that, like, nobody wants to sit here and listen to me talk about, hey, give me your next fucking 10-year dynasty prospect. Nobody gives a shit like that. Let's be honest, like, they want to hear drinking stories and, like, I don't know, some crazy story about getting drunk in Canton, Ohio with Drew Davenport and the fantasy doctor Jesse Morse.
There you go. See, that's exactly what people want. So we're just here to give the people what they want. And so, but speaking of the articles and the type of articles that you've been focusing on and everything, you actually wrote an article that was nominated for an FSWA award. Can you let everybody know exactly what that was all about and how that experience went down?
Yeah. So disclaimer, every year I put my podcast up for an FSWA award. Dwayne he goes, just stop. They're never going to nominate us. Like, just let it go. But I'm like, no, we got the one article in there, but so anyways, I did this article. I think it was entitled like the life and times of a fantasy dad or something like that. And it was basically me telling my story of how I have this poster off to the side of me of the legendary Oregon runner, Steve Prefontaine. He was an Olympian. And the quote on it reads, to give anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift. And in that thought, it's how I'm wasting my time and my talents by not creating content. And I talked about my wife and her battle with cancer and, what I'm doing now and hanging out with my kids and trying to find that delicate balance of, hey, I want to chase this dream of, being quote unquote fantasy famous. But I also have a life, and I have a wife and kids and a mortgage, and I'm not 22 years old. Like, if I was 22, 23, like some of these kids out there now, oh my God, go full bore into fantasy. But I'll be 42 years old in August. Like, I mean, I see some of these guys out there now. They're like, oh, I'm going to work full time for this fantasy site. Like, really? You're going to work, like, you're in your 40s. You're going to live on 40 grand a year. Like, you go work at Walmart and do that. Like, how are you going to pay the bills? But to each their own, but I can't do that. So I have to find ways to, keep my, keep the fire stoked a little bit, but not, live in a shanty somewhere.
Get that. I get that totally. I'm right there with you. But like being able to balance everything that you have going on in your life, because you brought up having a family, going to work, doing all of that. How do you balance everything and make sure that I know that your article talked about it, but how do you manage to not burn out, or what happens if you burn out?
Yeah, I think a few years ago, Dwayne and I did burn out. And that's why this year, if you ever listen to the Fantasy Football Hustle podcast, we stopped like 3 weeks ago. And we were just like, okay, kind of what we do is over with because the season long leagues are done. The high stake leagues, people seem to enjoy us in that field. They're over with. We don't really do a lot of DFS at this point. So we're like, let's just take a break, man. Let's just chill out. And that's what you have to do. If you're grinding 24/7, like, all right, DFS content, and now let's get into props, and you can't be everything to everyone. There's a lot of guys who are super talented out there. You know, if I want great DFS content, like I can go to PFF, I can go to Establish the Run, any of that stuff. I want to go read Mike Clay's work over at ESPN. Like, I don't need to be putting out all that stuff myself because, you know, I'm not the best at. I know what I do well, and that's, you know, tee up people and try to be a little snarky and funny and get information from them. And that's what I hopefully did this year with SiriusXM, my pal Andrew Erickson, and with Dwayne on the Hustle. So yeah, it's just finding that time because trust me, my wife hated capital letters me doing that SiriusXM show on the weekends. She was so glad when we were done because I was doing a show and I loved doing it. It was such a great opportunity and hopefully I get to do it again. But it was Saturdays from 3 to 5 Eastern and Sundays from 7 to 9, meaning I could go nowhere on the weekends from August through like literally like 2 weeks ago. Wow. So she's like, can this be done with? Like, what are we doing here? Like, you can't go visit my parents. We can't go anywhere on any trips because you got to watch these stupid games and blah, blah, blah. That's like, we were just at Home Depot or Lowe's, one of those stores tonight, literally before we came on the air, and we're looking at granite countertops. And my daughter is a cheerleader. She's 7 years old and she has a competition about an hour south of here. So I'm like, yeah, you know, so Saturday when we have to go to the competition, but my wife's like, Saturday? She's like, the competition's Sunday. I'm like, what? They put it on Sunday? Like, there's the conference championship games and all that. The look that she gave me, she's like, buddy, you've been doing football every Sunday. And like, you're going to your daughter's cheer competition and you're going to enjoy it. And we're going to make a day of it. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess we bring the earbud and I'll listen to some on the radio.
That's funny because I could see that exact same thing playing out in my life. Like, that's just, man. Well, let's go back. I want to talk more about podcasting because you have such a voice for podcasting. Like, your voice is so crisp and everything that you say, it just comes out such a nice flow to it.
It's funny because I don't think that at all.
You don't think so, huh?
I hate my voice. And like you and I talked about beforehand, I think I kind of like get off, and instead of being succinct, and that's something I try to work on with my tweeting stuff, it's like just say in fewer words what you need to say. But yeah, I get lost kind of, and then this like verbal diarrhea comes out and you're just rambling, but whatever.
Yeah, sometimes I have to stop myself mid-sentence and just like, what? What am I trying to say? So, but yeah, I think that your voice is a very excellent. Like, you've got one of those voices. I don't know. It's just not. It's not irritating. It doesn't grate on you. It's nice, you know. And that's the type of voice you want to hear your fantasy football content from. So, when you started the podcast, did you and Dwayne come up with that together? Did you decide on bringing him in, or how did that work out?
So when I met Dwayne, it was actually the first or second ever fantasy football hustle that we ever did. And back then it was called the Tuesday Night Hustle. Little trivia for you folks out there, as we now have just ended our 4th year of doing the show. And so I found Dwayne on Twitter. He had 200 followers and he's just tweeting out some cool stats and all this. I'm like, man, who's this guy? So I sent him a DM. I'm like, hey man, I'm nobody, you're nobody. Like, you want to be nobodies together? Like, come on this podcast with me. He's like, all right, cool. So he came on and we did the first show together. And I wish I could go back and listen to it, but I don't think our server saves it that long. After the show, my thought was, hey, I'm going to get a new guest every single week from somebody in fantasy football. And that's what we're going to do. Ryan Hallam comes to me and he goes, yeah, how about you just stick with this Dwayne guy? So I'm like, okay. So I called Dwayne back. I'm like, hey man. And Dwayne lives in Texas, by the way. I live in New York. Dwayne lives in Texas. I'm like, hey man, do you want to just keep doing this? He's like, sure. Okay. So then he came on and we just kept doing the show. Fast forward 4 years. Dwayne's little 200 follower mark has grown by a few. As last check, he's now over 30,000 followers and working full-time for Pro Football Focus with stops in between at Establish the Run and Football Guys and Fighting Chance Fantasy. So yeah, it's been awesome. And there every day I listen to other shows and I see things about YouTube, and I'm always trying to grow the show and grow the YouTube channel and become more of a one-man band. And that's something I really want to work on in this off season. But here's my advice to you, folks out there. If you want to start a show, and I went and I found, I was very lucky. I had some good, talented friends from Syracuse, who was guys who were professional DJs. And my buddy, Jeremy Caro, shout out to Sigma Alpha Epsilon, who just won an Emmy Award. He was the guy that created our video opening for the Fantasy Football Hustle. If you ever see our show on YouTube. And my thought was always this: if you're going to do a podcast, you need to sound professional. You need to look professional. You need to act professional. So you need to have slick graphics. So when you put that show up on Spotify, on Apple, it looks like a real show. It doesn't look like something that two guys made on like Microsoft Paint. You know, this looks legit. You look like you're in a list and someone's like, well, I could listen to the Fantasy Footballers, or I could listen to, you know, John Daigle, or I could listen to, you know, NBC Sports or Underdog. And like, oh, yeah, here's this other show. This looks legit. And you want to sound legit. Have a good microphone. So, you know, I went out and I purchased good equipment, have a good computer, and have good imaging. You know, you can't use commercial music. And that's one thing that drove me crazy, is I would hear guys like our own show at Fighting Chance, Steve and Ryan would open with Metallica, I think, was like their opening song. And I remember my buddy, he's a podcast producer now, John Gay, and he's the guy that does all the imaging for us. He's like, yeah, you can't do that. He's like, you will get, if your show ever blows up, he's like, you will get a cease and desist, and then they'll take all your content down and you're going to get screwed. It happens on YouTube all the time. So he's like, you can't have that. You've got to find your own sound. So that's my shout out to anybody out there who's trying to get in the fantasy game and with a podcast, is create your own name, create your own images, your own look, and sound professional. Sound like a show you'd want to listen to. Like Casey and I are on here right now, and I know you guys can't see this, but she's got great graphics and all this on the StreamYard, and it looks professional. And that's what you want to come across as. And I'm always trying to tweak that with the hustle, make sure that we look like, you know, the Evan Silvas of the world and the footballers and all that, because it's top-notch shit. And that's if you want to be those guys, you got to look like those guys. It's like that old adage of dressing for success. Dress for the job you want, not for the job you have.
Word. I agree. And it's not as hard as you would think it is to make it look the way that it needs to look. Like you could go, there's lots of programs out there that can help you make graphics, like Canva, and like, if you know Photoshop or whatever, and Fiverr's available if you need open, you know, intros. You know, Gabe was on here earlier. He found his little niche where he does podcast openings, and you know, so it's cool. But put your mark on your podcast. Make sure, like, you know, Brian said, having a professional looking thing. I like the dress the part that you dress for the job that you want to have, because that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. And so many podcasts kind of fizzle out because the effort was never there. So put the effort into it. Let it be your baby.
Right. People thought before, they're like, oh, wow, you guys are like real serious, real pros. We're two jerk offs in our basement. Like, you know, we've never met. I've never met Dwayne in real life. I've known him for now 5 years. I mean, I hope this year at the Fantasy Football Expo that him and I will get to hang out. I sent him a text today, actually. I'm like, yo, do you want to go to the draft in Vegas? Like, let's just go. It'll be a good time to go hang out and drink. But yeah, people are like, oh, you guys have this great show. Like, you've been doing this forever. And that's just because it looks the part. If you ever watch our show on YouTube or listen to it, it's got the opening and it's got the graphics and here's the other thing. Utilize people in fantasy. There are so many creative folks out there that will help you out, that will, you know, help you with artwork. This show would be nowhere if it weren't for our friends like our buddy 5 Yard Lee, who it works on the 5 Yard Rush podcast. There are guys out of the United Kingdom. whatever reason, these guys like us, and God bless Lee, because he's saved our ass a million times making overlays and just different graphics. And maybe we're working on a cartoon down the road, but we'll see if we can ever get that to fruition. But hit people up, man. You see guys out there who all the time, Scott Fishbowl season, like, oh, I'll make graphics and that. Like, that's how you make friends and, promote their work. So, hey, we can all help each other. Maybe you got a guy, you bring him on the pod, he does some artwork for you. It's friends helping friends out here. That's how we're all going to survive.
So is that how you go about getting guests on your podcast as well? Or how do you reach out to them to see if you can get them on your podcast?
When we first started out, it's very different now. And I'm going to sound like an asshole saying that. But when we first started out, we would just kind of like find some people that like maybe Dwayne knew or I knew a little bit. And, it wasn't, but again, we looked the part. And then once Dwayne started getting jobs at Football Guys, at Establish the Run and all that, like, then it's like, oh, wait, you work at these places. Like, ask Evan Silva. I remember that was the first thing. I was like, ask Evan Silva if he'll come on our show. And he called me one day. I remember he's like, yo, Evan's going to do the show. I'm like, holy shit, we're going to have Evan Silva on our show. Now he's done the show twice. Evan's a really cool guy. And that's what it became. We had Matt Waldman, Sigmund Bloom, a lot of these guys from Football Guys who really helped us out and put us on the map. And then once they retweet your show, it's huge, Like, I know Matthew Berry's done that for so many folks. We've never had Matthew Berry on the show. We've never tried to get him. But, I know he's coming on, and, I'm sure you can see the numbers from your show. When he comes on, like, you get the boost, you get that Berry bump,
Yep. Most listened to out of all the podcasts that I have, Matthew Berry. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. And who knows if it's your favorite or the most interesting show or whatever, but like that adds legitimacy. So now you go to the next guy, and, we've had Mike Clay and John Hansen and Bob Harris and these guys on the show. And that's kind of what you tell them. Like, hey, listen, by the way, we just had Bob Harris and John Hansen on, do you want to come on next? And these guys kind of feel like, oh, okay, cool. Like, you're a legit place to be. But I owe it all to Dwayne. Dwayne's ascension in the industry helped us so much because people want to be associated with him. I'm just an idiot along for the ride. Let's be honest here. And I just kind of make friends nicely along the way, but they want to hang out and they want to talk to Dwayne because he's super smart. And I would be nowhere if I didn't ride the coattails of my good friend, Dwayne McFarland. So I never try to put myself over and say like, I'm some fantasy genius. I enjoy doing the podcast thing and my little sappy articles that I write, but he's the star of the show.
So do you ever get nervous, especially since you named off all those guys coming on your show? And I know average Joe over here would be like,
Oh,
so,
yeah. I was nervous when we talked to Silva for the first time. I was real because I love the work that he and Adam Levitan do at Establish the Run. I really love that. And John Hansen, I'm a huge John Hansen fan. I know Ben Kukanis, who is kind of his production manager at Fantasy Points, and he helped get me in touch with John. And because I listened to that morning show on Sirius XM for so many years. So when he came on, that was really cool. So those are really the only two guys I think I was really nervous to talk to. And then once the Sirius XM show started, I remember that first day I was nervous because I've listened to that show that channel since its inception. And to me, Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio is a big deal. I don't know how many people out there in the industry, if you've got a subscription or if you listen or whatever, but to me, that's the pillar of success. That's making it is like, wow, you're on Sirius XM. Like, to me, a lot of those guys are the best of the best at what they do.
So how exactly did that experience happen? And like, how did you feel when you were told, like, this is what's going to happen? Are you cool with it? Or I don't really know the story behind all of it. So you can go ahead and go into detail on that.
Yeah, we're doing the Hustle podcast, and Dwayne gets a job he's going full-time now with Pro Football Focus. He left his real job. I won't get into that's his personal business, but he said that on the show. He left his job and he went full-time into PFF. So we kind of came under their umbrella. And this year going forward, like it'll be even more under their umbrella. So I'm kind of just this odd man out, right? Like Dwayne works there. They pay him a salary. I'm just like his dorky friend that does a podcast with him. And I joked around with Ian Harditz, who is, maybe one of the main guys at PFF in terms of fantasy content. And I joked with him at the Fantasy Football Expo because I got a call from George. If you guys follow PFF George Taruri on Twitter, he hit me up one day. And he's like, "Hey man, we listen to the show. We have an opening for the Sirius XM show. Would you be interested in hosting this with Andrew Erickson?" And I joked with Ian Harditz. I go, "You just didn't want to give up drinking on the weekends. Like you got bored of this, right?" And he just laughed. And I think Andrew did it for a year by himself, which is brutal. And, he said as much to me. And I really had a great time working with Andrew. But yeah, they came to me and they needed someone to do it. And I said, yeah, I mean, give me the times. And they told me, and my heart sank because I knew I had to tell my wife. But it was such a blast, man, getting on the air on Sirius XM. And my friends got to listen to that because they knew I did a podcast. But Case, you've probably heard this. Like your friends like, "Oh, okay, you got some fantasy podcasts where like 3 people listen and you still suck at fantasy." But then like when I told them I had a show on Sirius XM and like they could tune in and hear me doing that they're like, "Damn." Like, all right, you kind of made it, man. And that was really cool to me, is to be able to get on there. And, this year when we were at the Kings Classic fantasy draft at the Pro Football Hall of Fame during the expo, Michael Fabiano, for whatever reason, he didn't want to do the auction portion of the draft. There's a snake auction and a redraft auction. He just didn't want to do the snake or the auction. So they go, Bob Lung, who runs it, love Bob. He's like, "Hey, you work for Sirius XM now. Do you want to join this room and jump in this draft?" So I'm like, I'm in the other room, which is awesome. Kick-ass guys, Drew Davenport, Marcus Grant, Mike Tagliere was in that room, for years. And then they're like, "Do you want to come into this league?" And it's, it's Mike Clay, Jeff Radcliffe, Bob Harris, Jamie Eisenberg. This is the name of the other room is kick-ass. This room's even more out of control. So, my Sirius XM connection got me in there. But yeah, that was really cool getting on Sirius XM. And, God willing, they'll have me back for year 2.
Your wife is probably like, "Well, let's pump the brake."
She knew that, because I told him, like, "Listen, this is what I went to school for. This is my passion." Yeah. And I mean, I'm out there cutting the grass and I'm listening to Sirius XM. I love Hanson and Kaplan and, listen to those guys, and Radcliffe does a great job, and Bob Harris and Mike Dempsey, the football diehards. And I could go on and on the great folks on that channel. But to be on there myself, I was like, wow, this is making it. This is doing real radio. Like anybody can do a podcast. Howard Stern, I'm a huge Howard Stern fan. And he always says the same thing. He's like, anybody can do a podcast in their basement. He's like, go out and earn real money, at a real radio station where people are paying you to get ratings. He's like, that's real broadcasting. And I disagree with him to an extent now, because you could see, from what, jerk offs like Joe Rogan, what they're doing, and like your bosses, the fantasy footballers, who they've blown up and they're making a fortune, I would imagine, just doing podcasting. So, and I think that's just going to become more of the way of the future is, these podcasting and YouTube channels and just different ways to get content into people's ears.
And you love to see it. I mean, it's great to see how much it's grown and how many different podcasts there are out there and the different flavors of, people and everything else. When you and Dwayne are together, you guys have this chemistry that you can hear back and forth with you guys. How important do you think it is to be able to like get along with your co-host and have that kind of back and forth where you're not on each other's toes or being rude, but you guys can just, just talk it up?
I think what helps us is I can give my opinion on things, but sort of the dynamic of our show is I'm teeing up topics and then Dwayne hits it out of the park. Whereas like, I'm not going like, "You know what? You're wrong on that." Like, there's stuff we disagree on, but that's not the dynamic that we do. We're more of an informational show. Maybe down the line, we'll do some other stuff where it's more just kind of entertaining or whatever. But for now, it's hey man, people want this info. They're playing in high stakes leagues for a lot of money. Just tell me who to pick up because this is what the data tells you. And God, the best shows ever are the second we stop recording. Anybody in fantasy will know this. Is once you stop recording, that's when the real show begins. Because that's when you're shit talking everybody. That's when the beers you had on the show kicked in, and you're like, all right, now we'll go from the. We had Matt Waldman on one time, and we had literally, if we could have recorded that show afterwards, it was the best hour we've ever done. Was the hour off air with Matt Waldman.
That sounds awesome. Like the behind the scenes stuff, yeah, for real. Like being able to just cut it up and do all that. That is great. When you talk to people and you go on other people's podcasts. I mean, first of all, do you guest on people's podcast or is that?
Yeah, I've been asked to go on a few, and I try to never say no because again, I look at myself, I'm like, who am I? That's why I figured you've run out of people to talk to when you called me. I just did one recently with the guys at Front Yard Fantasy, and they were really cool. I didn't know a lot about them when I agreed to go on there, but I made sure to listen to a few of them and check it out. And boy, they do a great job. And there's so many people in the space that are doing outstanding work. And maybe, not everybody is the fantasy footballers. Not everybody is, the guys at Underdog and whatever, doing that kind of top level content where it's super produced. But man, oh man, there's so many talented people in fantasy. And we saw that at the Fantasy Football Expo. That was such a kick-ass time to go out there and see all these folks and see people that knew who you were and you knew them. It was just, man, it's such a great time. And I'm really looking forward to going back out there this year.
I agree wholeheartedly. I can't wait to go back out there. I'm going to do it differently this time because last time I was a nervous ball of just like,
why?
Panic.
You're a big name.
The problem. Okay, here's the problem.
I saw you one time. I saw you at a hotel, but you were like farther away, and you were just like
wasted.
And I'm like, I saw the glass. I'm like, I think that's Casey right there. And I'm like, I'm not gonna bother. Like nobody wants to talk to me.
Yes, you should have come up to me because, like, seriously, I was there by myself. My sister came and visited for a little bit, but like I was staying in a different hotel than the actual hotel that the event was. Because my wife had planned it, and my wife and I were going to go and make kind of a trip out of it. And so we had, a different,
okay.
Yeah. And so then she ended up not being able to come and, so whatever, I just stuck with it and tried my hardest. And it was a blast. Oh my gosh. It was so awesome meeting up with all the people that like you see only online, you talk to them on podcasts, but you've never gone up to them, like having people come up to me and me be like, oh my gosh, you are freaking tall. Like I never knew you were this tall or whatever. You're like, it was just crazy. So yeah,
that's the kid, Sam Wallace. Everybody looks at Sam and they go, Jesus, you're like 6'7". He's probably like 6'2", but he's towers over everybody else.
It's crazy. It's just crazy to think about. So going to the expo, like, was it everything that you thought it would be, or was it even more?
That was really cool. That was my second time in Canton because the Kings Classic draft, we did one pre-pandemic, and it was just kind of the guys who are in, and I don't think there's any girls in it, to be honest, at this point, but maybe there should be, but there just wasn't at the time. And we went and we did that the first year. So I got to meet Mike Clay and Tags and Bob Harris and Drew Davenport, who became like one of my great friends. Drew and I text literally every day. And good Lord, if those texts ever got out, like neither of us work in fantasy again. But so this year when we went, it was so cool. I met up with Kevin Tompkins, who's a buddy of mine who used to work at Fighting Chance, and now he's doing a bunch of stuff in the industry. And so he would ride around with me, and Drew and Doug Orth from FF Today. And we met up with Jesse Morse, who you guys see on Twitter, the fantasy doctor. And I had a bunch of drinks with him. And I wish I wasn't so hammered when we had the conversation with him, because he was dropping freaking knowledge about guys and injuries that he knew about that real people don't know about. Yeah. But like, there were other people in the bar that started like bringing chairs around, and they were like, what do you think about this guy's injury and that guy's? The one thing that I do remember through all my, 800 beers we had that night was he was talking about Dak, and he's like, Dak's not healthy. He's like, don't let them fool you. He's like, the shoulder's not good. And the ankle, that's what everybody's going to talk about, the ankle, but he was like the shoulders, and you saw it this year. Like Dak never looked right. So I think Jesse was on to something there.
Yeah, he didn't look right. Well, that's just
disgruntled Cowboys fan.
Disgruntled. Well, forever, right? Forever. So, so the expo in general, like, such a blast, like you said. And when people come up to you, and you're like, "Oh my gosh," and they know you, and it's just like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, how does it feel when somebody comes up to you and they like know who you are?
Yeah, there's two guys came up to me, and I got to hit them up actually, where they were. They do a ton of stuff on like Instagram and TikTok, and those are areas that I struggle with. And they were like, dude, we'll help you out. We'll show you stuff. And, we just start following each other. And that was really cool. And then to meet like my pal Mauricio, who's I've coined the Matthew Berry of Mexico. If you ever meet Mauricio Gutierrez, who's huge, works with NFL Network for Mexico, just drinking with him and shooting the blast. I had him on the Sirius show. Got to meet Scott Fish. That guy's a rock star. Holy smokes. I equate it to this. Like, Casey, imagine you're like Stone Cold Steve Austin, right? And you're walking into a bar and everybody's rocking a shirt with your name and face on it and stuff. Like, that's Scott Fish. Yeah, everyone's got a Scott Fishbowl shirt. Like, how crazy is that?
It's nuts to even think of. Yeah, I wore my Scott Fishbowl hat the second day I was there. Yeah. I was like, like that's how Liz Loza and I met each other, because because I was wearing a Scott Fishbowl shirt a few years back when she was in Dallas, and she was like, "You're in the Scott Fishbowl?" I'm like, "Yeah, me too."
Yeah.
I mean, it's just crazy to think about how these things bring us together and how we have so many relationships and friendships and all that stuff just because of, like the expo or like, Scott Fishbowl, those things. I mean, very important. And you brought up the King's Classic draft as well. Can you let people know more about what that is? Because I know not everybody out there knows exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so the funny thing is that's how I met Mike Clay, was going to that draft wearing a Scott Fishbowl shirt. So I'll share that story also. So the King's Classic is the brainchild of Bob Lung. I think Brad Evans and Mike Clay have a little to do with it also. Basically, they were like, we want to bring the best fantasy minds and Brian Drake into one room, and we're going to have like 2 leagues. It's expanded to 3 leagues now, and there's going to be an auction component and a snake component, and it is insane. We draft at the Pro Football Hall of Fame the weekend of the Fantasy Football Expo. I mean, you get to go into the Hall of Fame for free, walk around, see everything. You draft in like they call it the gold jacket room, which is the room like the enshrinees hang out in beforehand. I've got pictures of it. It's so sick. And we do the draft, and you play out the season, and it's tough because it's a 14-team league with the sharpest of the sharp dudes. So the first year I'm going to it, I'm flying in, I live in Syracuse. There's 0 direct flights from Syracuse to anywhere. And I'm on the plane, and Mike Clay is on the plane. He's sitting like 2 seats over from me. And now, obviously, I know who he is. He has no clue who I am. But I've got a Scott Fishbowl shirt on. So we're getting off the plane, and he's like, "Hey, dude, you going to the King's Classic?" And I'm like, yeah, Mike. What's up? And I introduced myself. He's like, "You want to share an Uber?" He's like, "ESPN's paying for it." I'm like, "Hell yeah, let's go." We were staying at the same hotel. And we started, talking, and he's got a couple of girls, and super nice, chill guy. And he's like, "You want to go get some lunch and have some beers?" I'm like, "This is great. Let's go." So we roll out, we go get some beers, and the guys from Dynasty League Football were there, Ryan and Eric, and we met Mike Tagliere and all those guys. It was just, man, it was such an experience to be associated with these guys. I'm like, I work for littlefightingchancefantasy.com. Like, I always think, I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, if these guys ever catch on, like I'm the first guy out, but luckily we've kind of grown the podcast and then the serious things. So I'm just trying to just keep building up bricks. So Bob has a tougher time kicking me out.
Is there anything that, I know you're building up these bricks, is there anything that you haven't added to your list of things that you'd like to be able to do in the fantasy football space?
Yeah, I'd like to do more just of those articles, and I've got a really good one in the hopper coming down the pike. But I want to do a solo pod, but I got to figure out how to do it. Like, we mentioned earlier, it's like, there's so many people doing a great one. Like Adam Levitan does an insanely good solo pod. Like, and he and I have a lot of similarities. I've never met Adam. He's like one of the guys I've never talked to in fantasy. I wish I would. He seems like a great guy. But like, so I want to do a solo pod, but I got to figure out how to do a solo pod that's unique. And it's not like, oh, you're just trying to be Jeff Manns. You're just trying to be Levitan. You're just trying to be, I don't know, Josh Norris or something, like you got to find your own thing. And then I've got an idea for a cartoon character, which I'm trying to get in the works with because it's different and nobody's doing that. And that's my whole thing with anything you do in life. If you want to be successful, you don't have to be first, just be different. And that's what we're trying to maybe do with this little cartoon bit for some gambling content for 2022.
Sounds interesting. Sounds fun. So yeah, you guys be on the lookout for that. So back to the expo, back to the Kings Classic and everything else. How do you feel that's going to go in the future? Do you think it's going to continue to grow? And what do you expect out of it in the years to come?
I hope so. I hope it keeps growing because it's really a highlight of my summer. And, it's an interesting thing because Bob Lung does such a great job putting it on. And I know it's an open to the public event, but again, it's in Canton, Ohio. So it's not like you're in Dallas or Miami or New York City. So, I mean, how many people can realistically you get there? It's kind of become this industry thing where it's all the content creators who they're never going to go to like an FSGA or whatever the initials are. And now they're not going to go to one of those summer conferences that you got to pay $1 billion to go to. This is kind of like the meeting of the minds of fantasy football, you're there. And, there was some bigger name folks. I remember the star of the show this year. I remember I drunk tweeted at Steffi Smalls because I was out with my buddy Drew Davenport and we saw her, and God, like her or not, whatever, people have a lot of opinions about Stephanie. I've never met her. I've never talked to her. I think, hey, she's making her name in the business and God bless her. But man, everybody wanted to meet her at that event and everybody wanted to take a picture with her. And that's what I did at the end of the night. Like she was taking pictures of people. So I drunk tweeted. I'm like, Drew Davenport or like at Drew, whatever his handle is, wants to take a picture with you. And he's like, you asshole. Like, why would you do that? I'm standing right next to him. He gets the alert. But yeah, it's a great place to meet people. And you find out at that expo that, you can make a lot of connections, and some of these guys and gals you think are way up here. And, like, oh my God, they're the biggest name in fantasy. Like they're just like you and me. They're looking for their next gig. They're trying to find a place to work and put their content out. So just don't be afraid to go up and talk to people. I know, there's just a lot of guys, who I didn't get to talk to there. Remember, Troy King? Are you friendly with him? Yeah. I met Troy in the bathroom of the Hall of Fame. That's the most random story ever. But like, I'm walking in or walking out. He's walking in, and I'm looking. I'm like, oh, hey, there's Troy King. I'm like, hey, man, what's up? And then he's like, hey, dude, what's going on? And then we just kind of passed. I never got a chance to talk to him anymore. But there's so many, great content creators out there.
Yeah, it was like you said. I missed out on a bunch of people because like there's just so much going on. There's so many people. So hopefully this year I can get everything in line and meet everybody I want to meet and take pictures with everybody.
Who do you want to meet? Let me spin this around. Who do you want to meet and hang out with out there?
I've talked to a bunch of people on this podcast that I haven't met in person. Like Andy Behrens is one that like I know like our paths didn't cross last year because he was only there for a little bit and I got super wasted the night before and was hungover and missed him. So probably him for starters would be pretty dope just because like he's been a big supporter of this podcast since like the beginning. And I've talked to him like this, but not in person. So that'd be pretty dope.
I got to sit next to him at that that draft. He was really cool. But yeah, I never met him either. I was in between. It was Jeff Radcliffe was on my left, and then Andy Behrens is on my right. And I'm just like the guy. They're like, who the hell is this guy? Like, did the janitor come in here and now he's drafting a team? But hey, it is what it is. Let me ask you a question because I'm gonna flip the tables on you now.
Okay.
I just mentioned Stephanie Smalls, and she's a woman in the industry, and she gets a lot of heat. And I think it's partially, I don't think partially, I think it's 99% because she's a woman. Now, you're a woman in this industry. You've been doing this for, 5, 6 years now, whatever it is. And how do you feel and how do you see the women in the industry who come into it? What advice do you have for them? What are the pitfalls? What would you say to a woman today who's like, I want to get into the fantasy business because, let's be honest, there's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I think some get scared off because they see the bullshit that maybe you get on Twitter or Stephanie gets or whoever else out there, Liz Loza, and it's got to scare people off.
For sure. Like when I first started, I was concerned that was going to be an issue just because when I wasn't writing fantasy content and just giving my opinion on stuff, I was getting stuff like that from certain individuals. You can go on their profiles and see who they are and see what kind of a person they are based on their tweets. And you're like, well, this person's not worth my time. The mute button, the block button, all that stuff, those are going to be your best friend. I'm not even kidding. Life has been so much easier and more rewarding when you don't have to deal with the bullshit.
Yep.
So making sure that you don't have that bullshit coming towards you, because you're going to have haters. Everybody has haters. It doesn't matter if you're a woman, a man, or what. Somebody out there, I'm sure, is either jealous of you, they're hating on you, they're whatever, because, or they want what you have and they can't get it. So that's the way that they're going to take it out on you. And honestly, you can't let it get to you because your mental health is more important than what a bunch of jerks on the internet say.
Mm-hmm.
As a woman, I think that, like, because of me, I'm kind of just like this chick that whatever, I'm just loud, obnoxious. I don't know very much about fantasy football. Like I set the tee up, I set it up for people, or I'm not a big stats person, right? So that'll come back to bite me in the ass every now and then when it comes to like a guy that's trying to like stick his nose where it doesn't belong. But you just have to block all that out. And if I that's what I do. Now, if you are the type of person that can't do that, then, just, I don't know what to say. Maybe Twitter's not for you, but maybe you find a different place to do your stuff. But for women overall, I think that, especially if you're like a pretty face or you're like sometimes people are just like, they only see what's on the outside and they just turn into total jerks about it because they're jealous of whatever. And it's just not something that you should waste your time on. I could go on a whole rant about how it's about women analysts versus just being an analyst for, it's just like all of that. So there'll be an episode with me where I probably get into big detail about that. So just
but it's really true though. And there's a lot of guys out there who are trying to make it in fantasy, and they go, how come Casey's with the footballers? How come Stephanie's signed with this guy? How come they'll say, how come Troy King got a job? How come this guy got a job? It's for their race, it's for their either ethnicity, it's for their gender. And at the end of the day, it's like, no, you need to be different. You need to be able to put out content. If you want to beat them and get that job, you want to work at ETR, at PFF, at RotoWire or whatever it is, like, you got to be different yourself. Like, you can't change. If you're a random white guy, there's a billion random white guys that want to talk fantasy football. Okay. There's like 8 women. So may they get a look before you? Maybe. But you know what? If their stuff sucks down the road, like, they're not going to be there very long. Like,
exactly. It's not gonna work.
Yeah. So find your niche, be different than just like, hey, I'm going to sit here and tell you 25 stats about, I don't know, like yards over expectation or whatever. Like, nobody cares about that shit.
Right.
Like, the other thing I would say is, and the fantasy footballers have done a great job of this. And I'll be the first to admit, though, I don't listen to a lot of their stuff. There's only so much time in the day.
Yeah, right. I get you.
What they do very, very well is they break down, from the 30,000 foot level, and they break it down for the common fan. So you can just be Joe Home League and you can listen to that show and get actionable advice from those guys. Now, maybe if you're some degenerate DFS player, that's not the show for you. Okay. You'll have a better time listening to, the Action Network or some of those guys. But if you want to just get good content, then maybe that's where you want to go. And they made it so it's sellable. And
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I said that in my article about content creators versus engagement farmers is what are you doing that someone wants to buy? And the footballers have done a great job of packaging a product that people want to buy with their draft kits and their DFS content and their redraft content. Like, how are you doing that as a content creator? Like, who would want to buy your shit? So
Mhm.
don't just look at it, oh, this is a woman, she's getting a job because she's a woman, or someone because of the color of their skin. Like, no, what are you doing that's going to make somebody want to buy your stuff? Why are
Mhm.
you so different? I don't know. I'll get off my rant. People are going to probably cancel me for that, but uh,
No, because look, at the end of the day, I don't care who you are, as long as the content you're putting out is content that I want
mhm,
to consume. So, and the casting the wide net, that's what a lot of people do, cast a wide net and then try to be too good at too many things. Like
yes,
like you were saying, find your niche and go into it like this is this is something different. I enjoy doing it. Enjoy what you do too. Don't just think
mhm.
you have to do what everybody else is doing, and then it might come back to bite you where you're not having fun. Most of the time, you're not going to be having fun if you're doing what everybody else is doing.
Yeah. I don't want to sit there and I can go on Pro Football Focus and I have access to this thing called Ultimate, which is just every incredible stat. Like it's literally like the guys who work there in NFL teams. Those are the only people that have access to it. And I can find you a billion different stats, but like that's not what I do. That's not, I guess, my audience. Like Dwayne can do
Mhm.
that 1,000 times better than me. So I'm gonna let Dwayne do that. I'll nitpick a few interesting things, but I'm not going to try to go over and above and be like, hey, I'm the new Dwayne. I'm the new Mike Clay. Because you're not, and it's never going to work out if you try to be somebody else.
And we were talking about that last night. I was talking with Linda, and she was talking about like you putting on a fake persona, and then it's gonna slip one day, like into your real persona, who you really are. And why would you want to, have
Every
to deal with
guy on
that?
Twitter who's talking smack to a woman or somebody else, you go to their profile. What's the first thing that's in their profile? It's like, I love Jesus.
Hmm.
It's all the same nonsense.
Yeah.
It's all like family man,
Family man.
some
Yep.
religious thing. And it's like, dude, come on. Like we see
Yeah.
through that. If
I
you're to
love
put
that,
that out
man.
there as a front, like
Yeah.
we could see around that already.
I love that. But yeah, that definitely helps with when people are coming at you and trying to be like total jerks to you, to go to their profile and just see what kind of
It's
really
always
that's
God
who you
first.
think you are, that really you
Yeah.
think you are. I love my wife. Blah blah blah. My daughters are my world. Okay, are you
Yes.
sure? Because the
And
way you're treating women doesn't sound like they are.
1,000%. It's like, oh, I love Jesus. I love my wife. I love my daughters. You're such a skank. Why do you give me
Yeah.
this opinion? You don't know anything about football. Like, imagine if somebody said, like, I have a daughter. Like, I would never say that,
No.
because I just could just imagine her growing up and like looking at her phone, like, who is this idiot? Some guy telling me, like, I don't know football because, I wasn't born with a dick. Like, come on.
So having, being a parent and everything, are you putting football out there and being like, hey,
My
maybe
kids
you'll like
hate sports.
no, they're not
Oh
they're
my
not big
God.
sports fans?
Not at all. I mean, they're 9 and 7, so we've got a
Yeah.
lot of time here, but we had the Bills Chiefs game on Sunday night, and my son, for the first time, was watching the game, and he's like, "Man," he's like, "My heart's, like, beating out of my chest." And I try to get him to watch Eagles games with me, and he just it just ain't his thing. And I have learned from watching enough after-school specials that you can't force your beliefs and your life onto your child.
Mhm.
And I don't care if that's your religious beliefs, your sexuality beliefs, political beliefs, sports, love, whatever it is, they're not you. Like
Mhm.
I loved sports growing up, and that's just not what my son's into. So, hey, if he's into computers and he's into the video games and all that, like I'm going to expose him to some sports, but I'm not going to beat him over the head like, come on, dude, you got to be on the football team and you got to watch, all these NFL games with me. Like, it's just not who he is. Like, who cares? Let him be like, he's going to resent you more. Be like, oh my God, my dad made me watch all those stupid games with him when I was a kid. Like, I hate football so much. I'd rather he just organically kind of finds it. And then maybe in a few years, he's like, yo, I dig this. Like, let's hang out and watch. Or my daughter, too. Like,
Yeah.
hey, if she wants to come watch the games, I'm more than happy if she wants to sit down there and chill.
What do they think about dad's, podcasting and radio and everything else? What are their feelings on that?
They think it's cool. My son is dying to get a YouTube channel, but I look at it and there's a lot of creepers out there, and I'm like, what do you? I don't know. Like I should help him out and do something. My daughter watches. Oh my God. Anybody who's a parent listening knows what I'm talking about. There are so many annoying YouTube channels that kids can watch. And it's always some like overly religious weirdo family with like 38 kids. And they're way too peppy and happy about life. And they're just doing nonstop content. And they're in like weird frozen dresses. And it's the worst. My wife and I just stare at the screen, and my wife's like, how come you don't do stuff like this? Like, these people are making a ton of dough. Like, Ryan's toy review, that guy's a billionaire now.
Jeez.
And I'm like, man, I should do content for kids, man. Oh man. But they love it. They like sitting down here and putting the headphones on, and they'll record themselves kind of talking into it. And my son likes that I have 3 different screens in front of me. He thinks that's really cool. My wife for Christmas bought me a little handle to put over the door to the basement that like you can flip it one way or the other. It's like a hotel, like housekeeping sign.
Yeah.
But it's made of wood. And on one side it says podcast in progress. Do not disturb.
Yeah.
So when I come down here and I'm doing that, I put that on the door, and then the kids know not to come down.
I like that. Great gift from the wife. Your wife, I'm sure, is probably one of, if not your most favorite person in the entire world. And you did bring up, earlier that you've gone through some stuff in life, and people close to you have gone through some stuff in life. How do you, you're such an upbeat, positive person, and I know you can't be like that all the time, but how do you, I guess, grow and get through the stuff? And because it's hard, right?
Like you said, you just need to be real and be yourself. You don't want to put everything out on social media because nobody cares, to be honest. But like with my wife, she went through cancer, and, my best friend dying in a DUI crash, but like, there's things to learn from that. Like, we created this great charity, and we did all these huge kickball tournaments here in Syracuse to raise money for a scholarship in my buddy's name. And, my wife is now, knock on wood, years past her breast cancer. So my kids didn't even know about it. They were very small, and they didn't realize mom's going through chemo. So, she's a warrior. I give her a ton of credit for that. And it's just, you just kind of live life, be who you are. It's funny you mentioned to be so positive. We mentioned Ryan Hallam, the guy who started Fighting Chance. He messaged me offline once, and he's like, dude, he's like, not for nothing. He goes, you're real negative on Twitter. And I'm like, thank God he told me that. And I've told him this multiple times over the years. And when I met him last year at the King's Classic, finally I got to meet him in person, and give him a big hug. Because I didn't realize that is you can get on Twitter and just be this like snarky asshole all the time. And you think like, oh, like I'm always right. My jokes are always great. And they're not, but you don't realize how you come off to somebody else. And especially other employers. I think maybe it was Scott Fish who said that it's like everything you put out on Twitter, from your articles to just your tweets and everything, is like, that's a job interview. Like your future employer, if you apply to, and this is the season, all the sites are now looking for new content creators. They're going to go through your old tweets. And they're going to say like, is this guy racist? Is this guy homophobic? Is this guy just a prick to women? And they're going to see that. And if you are, hey, guess what? You're probably not going to get these jobs because you can hide it on. Sooner or later, it's going to come out if you're a dick. But, it's like, just, put out there what you want out there, and kind of, you can control that narrative. It goes back to that engagement farming thing that I brought up before, but like, just be a normal person. Like, is it that hard to be normal and be a real person? Like, be a friend to people. If somebody's has a sick relative, and or they get married, you send them a message. Hey, congratulations. Hey, I'm sorry to hear that. Like, be a friend that you'd like to have.
100%. For sure. Like, I agree with you on that. Having friends in the industry and having such a like tight knit kind of group of people, did you ever in a million years think that was a group of like minded people? Maybe not like minded in their opinions, but just like a group of people that could get together that could talk fantasy football. Did you ever imagine that would be a thing?
I mean, to be kind of included in this, and that's what people want. And
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of the basis of my article, was not that one side's right and one side's wrong of, hey, I like putting out, like some guy was trying to tell me that, and he's like, I created the Mount Rushmore tweets. And I'm like, I don't care, buddy. Like, good for you. Like, God bless you. Or if you're the guy that does just like spreadsheet tweets, they all want to be part of a community. They all want to feel like they belong. They all want to be, as I say, fantasy famous. But at the end of the day, you just want people to appreciate your work and you want to have some friends, man. Like
Yeah.
I said with Drew Davenport, like he and I talk all the time now. And we're just like, we're always texting and screenshotting stuff. And that's the real underbelly of fantasy right there. There's fantasy Twitter, then there's fantasy text groups, which people don't want to talk about, is the text messages you have offline of, did you see what this guy just tweeted? Oh my God, what a moron. And then, but like on the surface, you're like tweeting like, congratulations, great job. But then underneath you're like, this guy sucks. He's the worst.
He's the worst. The worst. Well, we know you, my dear friend, are the best. And we're about to wrap this up. But before we go, I want you to go ahead and plug all your stuff that you got going on, where people can find you and all of that jazz.
Well, thanks for having me. This was a blast. You can find me at Drake Fantasy on Twitter. You can find the Fantasy Football Hustle podcast anywhere you get podcasts. It's myself and Dwayne McFarland. We're under the PFF umbrella. It's at FF Hustle on Twitter. Dwayne's got enough followers. You don't need to follow him anymore. Let's see. And of course, check out fightingchancefantasy.com. Casey and I both started there. Some kids doing some really good work at FC Fantasy Sports on Twitter. And if you're a new content creator or you're someone who you're kind of frustrated where you are, you want to write some stuff that maybe the site that pays you that doesn't want to publish, come to us. We'll put it out there. We have guys that work for, major sites, but they're like, hey, listen, these guys will never put this stuff out. I can only do this article for these paid guys. We're like, put it out, put stuff out through us. Like, we don't care. We're not going to pay you, but you can put it out. So yeah, definitely hit us up there. And I was doing the Sirius XM stuff with PFF, but the season is over for that. Hopefully we're back next year. I was doing that with Andrew Erickson, really sharp young kid over at PFF.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Brian, for coming on the podcast. Everybody, please make sure to go follow him. Check out all his stuff. Check out Fighting Chance Fantasy and all the awesome people over there. And make sure you tune in next week for another episode of Get Real and Stay Rad.